Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier, and having tracked Mao's path to power and how he immediately set about consolidating his hold on power, I'm going to take an early look at Mao's foreign policy and its impact on the maintenance of power. Leaning to one side, as Mao put it. The Communists had had some experience of government prior to 1949, the Yangtze and Yan'an Soviets, and it was this, along with the Soviet Union's experience, that they built on. They were also helped by the colossal force that was Mao Zedong. But they needed help, and one of the first things Mao did on gaining power was to take a train to Moscow, leaving Chinese soil for the first time in his life. Now, given the recent history, notably the Soviet Union's continual misreading of the Chinese context, its preference for the nationalists, and its lack of support for the communists in the Second Civil War, and given their very different interpretations of Marxism, I'll cover this when I look at Mao's policies in power, it was always going to be an uneasy meeting between Mao and Stalin. And if you add to that personal suspicion from both sides and good old-fashioned state rivalry, would the new PRC, for example, threaten the Soviet Union's standing in the communist world as well as the wider world? Well, you wouldn't guarantee the meeting's outcome. Still, Mao had spoken of leaning to one side, and responding to how reactionaries criticised him for doing so, he said, "To sit on the fence is impossible. In the world, without exception, one either leans to the side of imperialism or to the side of socialism." And he credited the Soviet Union with leading the anti-imperialist bloc. But he spoke of leaning, not of joining a monolithic bloc. China was not going to be the Soviet Union's lackey. Nevertheless, it was a necessary trip if the Chinese Communists' gains were to be consolidated. The Soviet Union was the only country the People's Republic could turn to. The trip proved as awkward as Mao probably expected. He was in Moscow for 10 weeks, from mid-December 1949 to mid-February 1950. He felt that the dacha he stayed in lacked the facilities he might have expected of his hosts. He was also bored with the visits to factories and state farms that had been laid on for him. Little had been provided to lighten his free time. An immediate and important sticking point in the talks was Mao's request to the Soviet Union to revoke its treaty with the Kuomintang, which had been made in 1945, and replace it with one with the PRC. For Mao, it would symbolise China's independence. It would not be seen as subservient to the Soviet Union, and it would be able to deal with imperial powers on an equal footing. Stalin, for his part, said he was reluctant to break with the agreements with his wartime allies, agreements to do with China, that had been made at Yalta. Something that didn't bother him unduly when it came to Europe. Rather than facing the issue head-on, though, it rested on whether Zhou Enlai, the PRC's foreign minister, would join Mao in Moscow or not. It took 2 weeks before Stalin acquiesced. But Zhou Enlai made the trip and was the chief PRC negotiator in the talks. And a new treaty, the Sino-Soviet Treaty of Friendship, Alliance and Mutual Assistance, was signed on February the 14th, Valentine's Day in the UK, 1950. The Chinese got what they wanted, a promise of military support should either power be attacked by Japan or its allies. $300 million in credit, supplies of industrial goods, and help in building an air force and a navy. On leaving Soviet soil, Mao sent off a telegram to Stalin expressing his deep gratitude. But on their return home, the Chinese were to discover that it all came at a price, and that they had been shown to be somewhat naive. The devil, they say, is always in the detail, and the detail of the treaty revealed that their fellow communists were not as generous as they had appeared to be, and the Chinese had indeed shown themselves to be naive. As security for the credit, the PRC was required to hand over a large proportion of its bullion stocks to the Soviet Union. And remember, Chiang had absconded with as much as he could carry with him when he fled to Taiwan. Of the money the Soviet Union advanced, barely 5% was in the form of investment. The rest was loans, which of course had to be repaid. The PRC was also required to pay in full the salaries and upkeep of the 10,000 economic advisors that the Soviet Union provided. Nikita Khrushchev would later admit that the treaty had been an insult to the Chinese people. Still, when we consider Mao's consolidation of power, we can still say that the treaty had significant benefits. More than 150 major industrial projects benefited from significant levels of Soviet support and laid the foundation for industrial growth. So much so that it was seen as the largest ever transfer of technology. And the Soviet Union handed back control of the Changchun Railway, as well as Port Arthur and the port of Dairen. Not only that, but the Chinese received military aid that really transformed the PLA from a guerrilla force to a modern army, and included surface-to-air missiles, with the Air Force and the Navy virtually developed from scratch. And the treaty included mutual security. An attack on one would be seen as an attack on both, which provided the PRC with immediate security against potential attacks from Japan and America. So, much as it came at a heavy price, it was nevertheless vital aid. I hope this has been useful for you, and if that's so, do please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already done so, do please sign up to my channel. And tell your friends about it too. Spread the word for me. But for now, let me thank you for listening and wish you the very best of luck with your studies. Cheers.